60. Now, I assume, last week you discussed text 60, that's Citta Pragya, that's where that phrase appears. Man of steady intelligence. And man of steady intelligence, the operative phrase is at the bottom, mat para. Mat para. Consciousness fixed upon Krishna, mat para. And when consciousness is fixed upon Krishna, something happens. The Paramatma burns up all impurities in the heart. So the endeavor, as in text 60, one may endeavor, but if the mind is not fixed up in Krishna, then the senses can carry away the mind. But if the mind and consciousness is fixed upon Krishna, then Paramatma burns up material attraction. This is a little illustration of something that's in Prabhupada's purport. As blazing fire burns everything within a room, Lord Vishnu, in the heart of the yogi, burns up all impurities. Now this is a yogi, but if his attention goes to Paramatma, he can also become free. If his attention goes to Paramatma, he can also become free. Just like we find in Canto 2, Chapter 2 of Bhagavatam. It leads to a change of heart where devotional service is taken up. Or another place we can understand about fixing the mind upon Paramatma is in Canto 3. And that's Kapila Dev's instructions about that process, which is the process for Kali Yuga, Satya Yuga, which is the process of meditation. But the process of meditation, after distinguishing matter and spirit, or the Sankhya philosophy, comes meditation on Supersoul. And from meditation upon Supersoul comes devotional service. But in any case, the mind has to go to Krishna. And when the mind goes to Krishna, even in this Paramatma feature, then impurities are burned up. It's not directly in Prabhupada's purport, but it's from Baladev Vidyabhusan's commentary. He writes, verse 60, which you've already covered, spoke of the senses taking away the mind by force to sense objects. Then in between was the Citta Pragya verse, text 61. Now 62, 63. Even for those who have controlled senses, if they do not direct their mind to me, it is inevitable that calamities will again arise, and those calamities, or in the effects of those calamities, is the subject of 62, 63. So all of that was to put this evening's verse in context. 62 and 63 they go together. Dhyayate Vishayan Pungsa, very often quoted set of verses. Sangas teshu jayate. Sangat sanjayate kama. Kama krodha vijayate. We've all heard that verse so many times. I've heard that verse so many times. Dhyato vishayan pungsa. So here's the sequence. We know it, but here it is in graphic feature. Starts with contemplating the objects of the senses, positively or negatively, meaning being attracted to or repulsed by, but contemplating. And what happens? Well, this is the thinking stage. Then comes the feeling stage. One develops attachment or repulsion for them. That's the feeling stage. And if it isn't, that you'll put the brakes on, it keeps going into the willing and acting stage. It leads to lust. I want, or I want to get rid of that sense object. Willing and doing stage. So what happens after it leads to lust? Unsatisfied lust, even if you get or you don't get, it's unsatisfied, results in anger. And from anger, delusion. That's destruction of one's discrimination power. That's what delusion is. And then bewilderment of memory. And then intelligence is lost. And then splash. We fall down into the pool of gross material existence. The pool of material existence. And it's not a nice smelling pool. It's like a cesspool. It's very bad, very stinky. That's the process that is the result of not just failing to control the senses, or it's the result of not bringing the mind and or consciousness to Krishna. That's the Sthita Prajna. I'll tell you a story after we're done about my Ayurvedic doctor. We had a nice discussion about Sthita Prajna. So here's a little graphic. There's a red light, yellow light, and green light. So here comes some attraction for a sense object. So when there's some stimulus, or from that stimulus, an object is out there moving or something, and you want or don't want, or want to get rid of it or something, some desire, there's the red light. You don't act on it. What do you do instead? You reflect, connect to the self, and the self being part and parcel of Krishna, and you respond by saying yes to Krishna. Now, a little sharing. Two things. In the evenings, with a group of devotees, we're reading Giriraj Swami's wonderful literature. If you haven't read it, read it. Get a copy and read it. It's wonderful. I'll build you a temple. And there's one of the encounters with Mr. Nair. He tried left, right, sideways, and everything to cheat the devotees. And one of the things he tried to do was get Giriraj Maharaj to be seduced by a prostitute, a well-known in the area of Juhu prostitute. And she started doing her thing without the vivid description. And he went through this sequence. There was some attraction, but then he went to the pause and reflect situation, and he knew if there was some fall down, it would bring a horrible name to Prabhupada and the Hare Krishna movement in Juhu. And he said yes to Prabhupada, which he didn't say how he, slapped the lady's face or something for doing what she was doing. But the yes to Krishna light went on. So whether it's attraction or repulsion, the stimulus is out there, some object, and then desire by contemplating. She brought about the contemplation, he didn't. Any case, this is a practical, if there isn't a deep connection with, in this case, the spiritual master, or with Krishna, there's the regulative side, and there's the spontaneous side, genuine from the heart side. then one can easily be carried away. Or the senses, the mind can be carried away to the sense objects by the senses. That was text 60. The Sthita Pragya position is when one's intelligence is steady. But how does intelligence become steady? What is steady intelligence? This was the story. The Ayurvedic doctor that I visit years ago, from his Ayurvedic doctor, he gifted him manuscripts that were in, they weren't in Sanskrit, they were in some other language. I forget what the other language was. It may have been Hindi, it may have been Nepali, I can't remember what language it was. And he was turning over his trove of treasures of Ayurvedic wisdom to his successor. So he had a whole team of translators going and, bringing those texts to language that others could access, and starting with himself, but others could access. And somehow, I don't remember exactly how, but the conversation got on Sthita Pragya, because through Ayurveda, balancing doshas, and the body can become properly balanced, that makes it possible to have Sthita Pragya. And I don't know, he hit a button, and I said, you can't have, I raised my voice, you can't have Sthita Pragya without Krishna consciousness. And I said, a few things. And he was like, he pulled back and looked at me and said, okay, you have to have Krishna consciousness. I was very strong. Because it's true. And it's Bhagavad Gita, but it's also practical life. Bhagavad Gita is practical life. It's not just some ancient text. It's practical life. Here is from Prabhupada's lecture in Los Angeles in 1968 on this verse. We are being bound by the false illusory beauty of this world. The exact example is the mirage. Reflection of sunlight on the desert appears to be water, but there's no water. The thirsty animal goes after the mirage thinking, here is water, I'll be satisfied. Similarly, we are running after the mirage and find no peace, no happiness. Therefore, we have to divert our attention to Godhead. Don't engage your senses in the illusory material beauty. Just apply your senses to Krishna, the really beautiful. Now, one more time, it's just another graphic that's showing what 62, 63 say. It's the alternative or the counter to Sthita Pragya. So let's be very clear what our topic is. This is the final section of this chapter is Sthita Pragya, and how by steady intelligence one can come to the position in Arjuna's case of fighting, or in our case of not wavering from duty. Very nice example. It made a strong impression in my mind hearing Giriraj Maharaj writing very simply, the temptation that was aroused by the senses and sense objects. But the break went on, and he was feeling contented, he feeling happy with himself because he chose Prabhupada over the senses. Very strong, very, very real stuff. Very real stuff. So here's the sequence. Down at the bottom, there's a living entity that fell because he didn't have Sthita Pragya. And this little map is showing how he got there. And contemplating the objects of the senses develops some attachment. From the attachment, lust develops. When lust is frustrated, anger develops. That's what's going to be in the upper right It's not spoken in the verse, but something obstructs the fulfilling of a desire. The desire unsatisfied results in anger. So now once anger develops, complete delusion arises. When delusion arises, memory goes out the window. And when memory goes out the window, intelligence is lost. And when intelligence is lost, look out, you're in big trouble. The phrase it's used is buddhi nasa. Buddhi nasa. Intelligence is nasa, it's destroyed. Destruction of the resolve to practice spiritual life. One falls into the material pool. Bodhi nasa. So we don't want bodhi nasa. We want bodhi yoga. And to get bodhi yoga, you can't let the mind take shelter of something other than Krishna. Because one will fall into the material pool very quickly. And that little box on the right, there's the alternative. That's the lesson of this section. Engage in devotional service to Krishna. In Arjuna's case, it's fight. Here's the final slide. Baladev writes, the conclusion of this little section that we just covered. One who wants to conquer the mind must worship the Lord. Very simple. And, the contrast is there. If you don't worship the Lord, there's this chain sequence that happens. The classic story. I've heard it a number of different ways. One was someone giving a class, and there's someone that was giving a class, Prabhupada was sitting on the Vyasasana and wanted to examine how they give class, and they were going on and on explaining this happened, that happened, then I fell into Maya. Prabhupada interrupted them and said, you fell into Maya. You're always in Maya. So we're always in that fallen condition where unless the mind and consciousness are fixed in Krishna, the deluding potency is acting on us. Unless we become fixed in Krishna consciousness, the deluding potency, we're subject to those influences. Now, regulative devotional service is good, but it has to go beyond that. It has to go beyond that because the regulative devotional service will also be tested. And you stay with regulation, you're in a safety zone, but it's not perfect. It's the actual taking shelter of the personality of Godhead. One who wants to conquer the mind must worship the Lord. Okay, I'm glad I found the right presentation. Sorry, at the beginning I opened the wrong one up. And I'd like to find out if anybody in the listening audience would like to have some discussion.
Yes, Maharaj, definitely. Before that, I'll just want to announce for 2 minutes. So every Sunday, we have a program starting from 6 p.m. Today, nowadays, because of COVID, we are doing virtual for some time. We will announce we are going on in person. And we have Wednesday Sangha every Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. with the same Zoom. This Wednesday, Professor Gopal is going to speak. And next Sunday, His Holiness Bhakti Vasudev Maharaj is going to speak this Sunday. And every Sunday, every day we have a japa session that is happening every 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. 8 a.m. Sorry, anyone can join anytime during this time. And From Monday to Friday, we have Bhagavad Gita reading from 12 p.m. to 12:15 p.m. It's a 15 minutes time where devotees go through
It's hard
Bhagavad
to
Gita stoka and
understand it.
everything. And on every Friday, we have Bhakti Vikshas. So if anybody is interested, they can join Bhakti Viksha. So if anyone has any questions, please, you can raise hand and ask questions. So thank you, Maharaj, for really putting wonderful analogies and a wonderful screen. Uh, the description here given, I really liked about this traffic light, which you have put the red, yellow, green. That when we have to really stop our stimulus and our desire, that we know now this is a time we can pause. This is a time now we have to reflect on the reality and connect to the real self, like, to the yellow and respond. Yes, this is actually for, this is related to Krishna, and definitely I can go ahead with this, right? Sometime in our life, these decisions is sometimes becomes very difficult, right? To go from that, uh, to discriminate this, like, this stop the yellow part, like, to distinguish the reality and reflect. So how can one do that? What are the qualities one can develop to in order to where we can take shelter if we are not able to decide?
You just retold my class. Thank you very much. I see a hand up. I see a couple hands up.
Yeah, we have Rashi Mataji. If you have a question, you can definitely.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you so much for the wonderful class. I have a question on the flowchart you explained. So I do understand that when once your desire is not satisfied, it leads you to anger ultimately. But what if your desire keeps satisfying? Then why not? I mean, I do understand. I totally believe that you should surrender to Lord and devotional service. But what if desire keeps satisfying and you gets involved into it?
You're a
So
dream.
what's the way out?
You're a dreamer. The world that we live in is a world of duality. When you have this, you also have that. So, it's nighttime. Wait a while, it'll become daytime. Oh, I'm having a nice time. It's daytime. Wait a while, it'll be nighttime. It's just the nature of the world in which we live. It's not always dark. Sometimes there's light. Sometimes, the object is there contacting the sense, and it seems like, hey, yummy, this is really nice. But dushparena analena cha, burns like fire, and it's not what real happiness is either. And wait a while, it's a place of duality by design. So your notion doesn't match reality. I mean, it's a nice notion. It's not reality.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you very much.
Look at it's winter, and it's COVID, and look at all the things that aren't. What you're saying, everything is nice. It's not nice. Birth, death, disease, old age. It's not nice. It's la la land, thinking it's nice. It's not the nature of the place by design.
Yeah, it is not. But if you have peace inside, which you get by surrendering to Krishna, then everything will become nice.
Well, it becomes transcendently nice. But the idea that someone isn't in transcendence, to say it keeps staying nice. It's not the way it is. And an honest person that understands even duality, happy, sad, pleasure, pain, wet and dry, light and dark. It's not always any one thing. What to speak of the standard of what real contentment is. It's not available in the world of duality. It's just not here. So it's a nice notion that doesn't match reality. Hmm. Sorry to say. Nice try.
Yeah, I know. Long way to go, though.
Nice try.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Nice try. Next.
Thank you, Rasmata. Thank you, Maharaj. There we have Lalit Prabhu. Lalit Prabhu, please go ahead.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Wonderful class, very, very illustrative. Thank you for that. So Maharaj, my question is on verse 53 from chapter 2. Shruti viprati yada shatyati nischala samadhav achala buddhis tada yogam avapsyasi. So the translation by Prabhupada is, when the mind is no longer disturbed by the flowery language of the Vedas, and when it remains fixed in the trance of self-realization, then you will have attained the divine consciousness. So when we say the mind is no longer disturbed by the flowery language of Vedas, so the meaning that I am interpreting is that even Vedas should not be read in detail, because they are recommending some fruitful activities to chase to get some benefits in life.
Yes.
So should we just give up everything else? So this is where I was a little bit perplexed.
Say the punchline of your question again, because it's easier to speak, but I like to address your question. The punchline is, what are we supposed to do? There's the flowery language. There's the flowery language. Let me say back what I think you're asking. The flowery language is pointing to perks that come from those who follow Vedic injunctions. That's the flowery language. Don't be distracted by the perks that are promised by that type of language. Now, your question is, what do we do about, things that we desire, or even necessities that are in the category of the temporary? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, and also, even if Vedas are recommending those activities, should we care about them?
Oh, this is simple. It's really nice to keep things simple. And the simple is, you water the root of the tree, and when you water the root of the tree, all the leaves and branches and twigs and fruits and flowers, etc., receive the water. So we accept the fruits from the tree, but we accept them as a gift from Krishna we offer to Krishna. We don't chase after them. We don't become enamored to do this to get that. When that comes, we're grateful. Now this is on the platform of duty, but we're grateful, and we offer that which is gratefully given, or graciously given and gratefully received. We offer that to Krishna in his service. That's on the regulative platform of devotional service. So we don't bother ourselves with it, but when it comes, we don't call it a bad name and throw it away. We say with gratitude, thank you, Krishna, please accept. This is an offering to you. That's the virtuous person's life. The spontaneous platform is yet another thing.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Okay.
So, Rani Mataji, please go ahead.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Thank you so much for the wonderful class.
Mm-hmm.
So, Maharaj, my understanding is that whatever we do as a as an offering or as a service to Krishna in whatever situation we are. So basically, do anything without ego or greed or lust involved in it, but more of love and compassion. So, however, if some of our desires, like material desires, even if it is small, it when we get our desired fulfilled, we do get the happiness. So, when we do get that happiness, is it that the love for Krishna is missing?
No. Well, it can be. It doesn't have to be. It can be that your love for Krishna is missing. Let's take the example of a small child. And suppose you give the small child a cookie. Is he happy? It's prasadam.
Yes.
It's prasadam. But the small child could just be thinking about his tongue and belly, and the small child could be thinking, this is Krishna's mercy. Now, it depends on the consciousness behind that which is received and how you utilize that which has been received. Whether it's, devoid of Krishna consciousness or replete with Krishna consciousness. Does that answer your question? Depends on the consciousness behind, not the act of receiving or not receiving. You can go the other way.
So, for example, what will be the consciousness of receiving something, any material desire which you get and you get the happiness out of it? So, what could be the consciousness behind it?
There you're entangled in the complexities of material existence. Birth, death, disease, and old age, for starters. No, Dhruva, he wanted a kingdom. He got a kingdom. But because his Krishna consciousness had awakened, he wasn't wanting the kingdom, nor was he wanting anything. The kingdom was given to him, and the opulence of the kingdom was given to him, etc., etc. So, having a material desire is the nature of a conditioned soul. And as we move, you and I move along the bhakti path, because somehow good fortune came our way, and we understand, as you described, what we're supposed to do, but we still have material desires because we're not there yet. We're not at the stage of pure devotion. So I'm trying to ascertain just what your question is. It's mixed. What is it? It's mixed. We're feeling some gratitude to Krishna for taking care of that necessity or that desire that we receive being taken care of, which Krishna is very happy to give, the fulfillment of those things. So how does that strike your heart? Is it, what is it? You can say
gratitude.
You can say thank you, and then how do you say thank you from your heart besides from your words saying thank you? Do you devote yourself to Krishna, not because he gave you the things that you wanted, but because he's Krishna? And will that steadiness in serving Krishna be there even if, some time passes and that thing disappears? Because for sure, things that are material will disappear. Slowly or quickly. And then what's going to happen with your gratitude? So that's the test. The test is being very secure in your relationship with Krishna, regardless. So that when receiving something, back to your question, when receiving something, it's a test. It's not like Krishna's putting you under a magnifying glass and he doesn't already know, and he wants to see if you're going to wiggle or not. He knows, but he's reciprocating. And then, for us, the essence is the relationship with Krishna. And if your Krishna consciousness is weak, it's going to be more of whether your desire is fulfilled or not. And when your Krishna consciousness is strong, it's not about whether your desire is fulfilled or not. It's the relationship with Krishna, whatever it is. And it's a good sign. It's a sign of Krishna's special kindness that most people don't process this way. But if something doesn't come, that's Krishna's special kindness. And if it doesn't come and it doesn't come and it doesn't come and it doesn't come and it doesn't come, and you continue to serve and serve and serve, Krishna smiles. Because it shows you've chosen to take his shelter. Anyway, so we're making choices all the time. And one moment, one day, and another moment, the next day, it's going to be different, right? But the test is, that, back to your question, some desire is fulfilled. Now what? What are you going to do with that? That's the test. You can say thank you. And then if it doesn't come the next day, what happens? And guaranteed.
We still say thank you.
Yeah, guaranteed. Along with something coming is going to be nothing coming, or it's something unpleasant. Someone says or does something harsh, etc., etc. Then what are you going to do? Then so it's always resting on your relationship with Krishna. That's the lesson. That's the lesson of life. And those that are devoid of knowledge of Bhagavad Gita or scriptural texts, they're just being moved by the waves of the wave is up and then the wave is down. And the wave stays down, they get depressed and do crazy things. So we want to go to the shelter of Krishna, whether something good comes or doesn't come. Something good is, the real good is Krishna's kindness comes to you. And don't use the material yardsticks. That's the test. You follow?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna. Ram Tosi, how we doing?
Yes, amazing. Thank you very much for that wonderful question. And thank you, Maharaj. We have Ramchandra Prabhu question. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. When we talk about anger, Maharaj,
There's an echo.
there is
Ramchandra, there's an echo. You've got too many things on at one time.
Yeah, Maharaj. Now it's muted.
Okay, good.
So there's anger for when our desires are not satisfied leads into anger, and then there's also anger, which is spiritual anger, which I've read several. Like I'm reading this book by Bhaktivikas Maharaj, where he talks many times about how Srila Prabhupada used to get angry and people would misunderstand and say, hey, how come he's getting angry as a sadhu? But Srila Prabhupada never tolerated blaspheming of the philosophy or Krishna or his devotees. So how can devotees also differentiate between sometimes we become weak in the name of not to get angry, to always be humble. But I've seen many times over the last so many years, sannyasis getting angry for the right cause, when somebody's just taking things lightly or blaspheming. So it's okay to stand up and defend the devotees. Generally, we tend to get angry when somebody says something to ourselves. But as soon as some devotees are said something or the movement is criticized, people tend to take a back seat and remain quiet.
I'm going to speak something out of step, if that's okay. There are many possible responses that one can take when there's something that seems to need to be addressed, or it needs to be addressed. And speaking strongly is one option, and there are many other options. It's not that there's only one option. I can think of some circumstances when Prabhupada was just endlessly tolerant. I can think of some examples when Prabhupada, his lips trembled, but he didn't say anything. I mean, I heard from Hari's story about such examples. Then there are times when Prabhupada spoke very strongly. So there's it takes discrimination. It takes direction from Supersoul to, when you're in that pause space, you see something, and you feel that something may need to be said. What's the right response? I'll share with you one lesson. You're referring to a book that you're reading that Bhakti Vikash Maharaj wrote. He has a certain personality, as we know. And I had a discussion one time, a very memorable. I learned many lessons from Borijan Prabhu. One of them was, he, at one point in time, he was the engineer or the leader, the founder of the VIAG. So he was teaching a course and I was teaching a course. And he was very kindly accommodating me in his room, and every day we would have lunch together. It was a really simple exchange. And I remember very clearly one day, I pointed out to him, here's something, and this needs some attention. What are your thoughts about this? And he waxed into the Borijan space. And he was specific to the situation I brought to his attention. He said, there are some things that are just between this one devotee and Krishna. And there's no need for you to go there and do what you feel is the right thing to do, because there's something that's needed. And it's very clear. It didn't deny that something was needed. But sometimes it's between that person and Krishna. And you just have to let Krishna do what Krishna does. Now, some people don't like that. Maybe besides Bhakti Vikash Maharaj might not like that. Some other people might not like that. But there is a place for that. So I'm a little, as I said, a little preamble, as I'm going to be out of step here. And there are times when something needs to be said, and said strongly. As I'm speaking in response to your question, I'm thinking of very amazing Vyasa Puja offering that Shivaram Maharaj wrote for Srila Prabhupada many years ago, when he was at the Bhaktivedanta Manor, and there was some function, and he was seated next to a Mayavadi, and the Mayavadi was going on and on with Mayavadi nonsense, and they had some discussion. And Shivaram Maharaj was very, he was polite, but he was, he was Shivaram Maharaj. He was very strong and very straight. And he didn't tolerate the man's speaking nonsense. But it was private. He was just leaning over, and the other man was leaning over, and they were having a conversation. The man wasn't happy. He was noticeably disturbed, but it was, wasn't cutting him. So, my point is this: there are different responses besides show of anger when something needs to be corrected. Sometimes there's something inside that's really hurting when they behave in a way that's not, a Vaishnava way to act. And there are ways to help that person, whatever is inside, to correct that behavior. I can think of so many examples. My main point is there should be a range of options, not just being passive when something needs to be corrected. And that's like what a sadhu does. You're just passive. And there's different personalities that will behave more like this, and others that will behave more like that. Here's a classic example. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was known as a Shinga Guru. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur, his methodology was humble persuasion. And dealing with deviations, there was two different personalities that had enormous regard for one another. They just had a very different approach. And very powerful, very influential, very effective. And to bring people to bhakti life, Bhaktivinoda Thakur wasn't incapable of being strong. He was strong when it was needed. But his at least from the way it's characterized, his style was largely humble persuasion. Not just, correcting in a strong manner. I didn't read this, I was told that somebody said, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Bhaktisiddhanta said, why do you entertain these people? They're this and they're that. They didn't agree on style. They had a different approach. But it's not that Bhaktisiddhanta didn't have all utmost absolute regard for Bhaktivinoda Thakur. They had a very different approach to things. There's so many examples.
So Maharaj, it also depends on the nature of the individual.
Yes, and the circumstance. Yes.
As long as the intentions are not to hurt or
yes,
or any
yes,
intentions met.
And intention is one thing, but then what's the practical effect is another thing. Supposing someone is very strong and somebody leaves. That's not so good. One can make correction that doesn't necessarily result in somebody leaving. Now, sometimes people need to leave. And sometimes they just need to be corrected in a clear and strong manner. So it's not just intention. I don't intend to rip somebody apart or defeat them, but you intend to bring to a higher place of consciousness, and that takes finesse. It takes spiritual strength to be able to do that. I mean, in the world, there are Bhakti Vikasas that are needed. And then in the world, there are Bhaktivinoda Thakurs that are needed. And it's not that Prabhupada only did one thing. He did different things, depending upon, and one person, but he did different things in different circumstances. He's very, very tolerant. Very, very tolerant. And very strong sometimes. And he knew when, what was appropriate. And he had spiritual strength to lift people.
So Maharaj, when Arjuna was fighting, just before he started fighting, he was being very meek and humble. But then when he started fighting, was his mood in anger that he was fighting, or just as duty and?
Oh, he had
fighting?
no. I mean, he was angry. Prabhupada explains this. You can't fight and kill if you're not angry. Krishna was inciting him to anger, but it was transcendental anger. So there's a big difference between transcendental anger and the other kind. Big difference. Big difference. And if you're not a transcendentalist, better watch out. Because fire burns. And anger is fire. Better watch out. Don't imitate. Let me share one little story. Because, do we have time? Little Prabhupada story? Okay. Because I don't see any other hands up. I didn't have tons of association with Prabhupada, but one exhibition from him of anger was remarkable. It's a shorter version of a long story, but I was in Prabhupada's quarters along with a number of other devotees who were members of ISKCON Press, because at that time there wasn't BBT, it was ISKCON Press, and they were the artists. And Prabhupada was visiting, so they brought all the way from, where their art studios were, by hand, they brought the paintings, and I was the temple commander, so I brought one of the paintings in, and I was sitting in the room. And the mood was an ocean of joy. Prabhupada was speaking to the devotees, making comments about the painting, asking them something, teasing them something. It was joyful. The whole room was filled with laughter and joy. It was just an ocean of joy. And I was sitting right by the corner of Prabhupada's desk, and I noticed he reached over and pressed a little button on his desk. That button on his desk was ringing the bell for his servants' quarters. I didn't know that till later, but then his servant came in. And when his servant came in, he paid obeisances. And while he was paying obeisances, he didn't even finish paying obeisances, Prabhupada thundered something. My brain shut down. I don't even remember what he said. He was just like, he was the total opposite of mood. I found out why he had done like that later. The person was having a sensual problem, and Prabhupada was like letting him have it because he needed it. And then, some exchange, the servant left, and just like that, Prabhupada's mood was immediately back to joy. Immediately. And the room filled with joy. But when he was angry, the room shut down. I heard Rupanuga describe something similar. When Prabhupada would laugh, he would sometimes tell a Bengali joke, and he would laugh, and no one understood the joke, but because he was laughing, the room filled with laughter. Everyone was laughing because he was that kind of a person. He was just very heavy, guru, very heavy. But when he was joyful, the room was joyful. It was like it didn't even happen. So when he was using anger, it was transcendental. It was for some purpose. I felt at that moment it was like he pulled the sword out of a sheath, he moved the sword around and put the sword back in the sheath. And it moved on. It's like it didn't even happen. So he wasn't controlled by anger, he was using it for a very specific purpose. And there's other times he may have carried on for some days. I didn't have that experience. But he wasn't controlled by it, he was using it in Krishna's service. And he knew when to and when not to, and to whom and how. So I don't know what's in Bhakti Vikas Maharaj's book. I do know that we have to be diverse and very flexible in how we deal with situations that may need some correction. The time may not be right, the circumstance may not be right, we may not be the right person, and so many things need to be considered before just immediately pulling the sword out. In service to Krishna. So I think we're kind of used up our time. Ram Tulsi, how we doing?
Yes, perfect. Thank you, Maharaj. I really like the point that you're saying when that intention is one thing, but the practical effect that is very, very important. So I'll put that as a conclusion today. And thank you, Maharaj, for coming and giving us very inspiring
Krishna.
everyone of us. And hopefully